On the one hand, I do feel kind of bad putting this game on the list above titles that are a little more critically acclaimed, a little more innovative, and, in some cases, perhaps simply better than what was essentially EA's Lord of the Rings-themed take on Final Fantasy X. Yet, there's something to be said for the fact that the Third Age gave us a true Lord of the Rings RPG adventure at a time when the films were still the hottest thing in the world. This strange blend of film scene recreations and original storytelling gave fans the chance to dive into Middle-earth again, and the game holds up remarkably well to this day as one of the best ways to relive your movie memories. Vanillaware's resume is filled with nothing but home runs, and the PS2 era was no exception. Grim Grimoire is one of the console's better strategy games, and it ranks among Nippon Ichi Software's best projects. However, Vanillaware's standout PS2 release was Odin Sphere, a creative action RPG featuring multiple playable characters, intense combat, and a highly replayable structure. Visually, the game oozes color, personality, and charm in its character designs and environments. Odin Sphere debuted after the PS3's debut, making it one of the final great PS2 RPGs. However, the console struggles to run the game at times. Consequently, the original version is difficult to recommend when the superior Leafthrazer remake exists on more modern systems. The 2016 release not only runs better, but it also improves on the core gameplay and mechanics. Released in 2003, Atlas Shin Megami Tensei 3, Nocturne was a watershed moment for the franchise. It was the first mainline entry in the series to be released in the West, bringing the property's signature Pokémon and Hell scope to a wider audience. Nocturne also boasted a third-person perspective, eliminating the first-person camera of the old games. Nocturne was as moody as it was hard, but this didn't make it any less of a classic. That's without even mentioning its notable inclusion of Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Both a great update of the formula and an awesome game in its own right, it's definitely where gamers want to start when it comes to the franchise. Thankfully, the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch ports make that easier than ever. Square Enix and Disney's collaboration has, mostly, produced gold, and the franchise's shiniest release is arguably Kingdom Hearts 2. Expanding beautifully on the ideas of its predecessor while sharpening some of its rough edges, the 2006 sequel features gorgeous visuals and a generally decent story, albeit one that can be unnecessarily convoluted at times. With 15 worlds to visit, KH2 is perhaps the strongest selection of stages in the franchise, and they cover a refreshingly wide variety of IPs and settings. The combat system is fast-paced and fluid, and it progresses nicely throughout the campaign, which helps set KH2 apart from its numbered successor. That said, the gameplay is a bit too easy at times and only really ramps up during the optional boss battles. I've heard some criticize Radiata Stories for taking too long to click for them or simply never grabbing them at all. To be honest, I really do get those complaints. This game's more relaxed style and often slow-moving narrative just aren't for everyone. Yet, I will always respect the way this game uses its NPCs. Along with being able to recruit over 176 NPCs who each bring their own stories and abilities to the fold, this game makes a simply admirable effort to ensure that every person in this world feels like they really live in this world. You can't come close to seeing everything this epic has to offer in one playthrough, but those who love it won't mind playing it again. Suikoden 3 takes place 15 years after Suikoden 2, which is one of the best JRPGs on the PS1. The sequel tends to be overshadowed by its predecessor, but it is another masterpiece that represents Konami at its peak. The storyline is phenomenal, and the same could be said for Suikoden 3's battle system and visuals for its time. The plot develops over 3 different character perspectives and is known for good character development in its story. Another recently ported classic that was initially available on the PS2 is Tales of Symphonia, which is part of the Namco's Tales series. Unlike many Japanese RPG franchises, these titles have action-based battle mechanics. Even though it's had several successors, Symphonia remains the brand's high point. The reason for this is that Tales of Symphonia simply handles the formula so well. The story, characters, and pacing are very well done, whereas other games in the series typically err in one of these categories. There are also tons of areas to explore, allowing for a variety of gameplay outside of battles. This all came together to create the perfect Tales game. The PS2 has 4 Marvel-themed action RPGs that form one franchise, and they all have something to offer. Marvel Ultimate Alliance is probably the most popular of the bunch, and the massive crossover game is still a blast to play through all these years later. Vicarious Vision's sequel tries to shake up the formula from its predecessor, but most of the changes were not necessarily for the better, resulting in a decent but frustrating experience. While still worth a glance, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 is tied with its Switch-exclusive sequel as the weakest entry in this series. Occasionally forgotten is the fact the Marvel team-up games were preceded by 2 X-Men projects, both of which are roughly the same quality as the first Ultimate Alliance. X-Men Legends set up the formula that would become the standard for all these projects, an expansive roster of playable characters, linear stages, some light RPG progression systems, and beat-em-up combat. Its sequel, Rise of Apocalypse, is generally a more refined experience, providing a fun and challenging campaign that is also fairly accessible. All these titles are worth playing in their own right, but X-Men Legends 2 just about earns the nod. If you had to knock Dragon Quest VIII for anything, it would likely be this sequel's adherence to the tropes and ideas of its predecessors. This certainly isn't the era's most innovative RPG. Then again, when you're building upon the franchise that helped establish and define JRPGs, it's hard to really knock you for sticking with what most certainly works. This is a truly epic and expertly well-crafted JRPG experience that so happens to also be one of the PS2's best-looking overall games. The first title of Namco's Xenosaga trilogy came out in North America in 2003 and had great international success. It got both a 12-episode anime and a manga adaptation due to its popularity. The science fiction story is set in a time when humanity has left planet Earth. The protagonist, Shin, is a battle android that was designed to fight hostile aliens. Its story was called enthralling by reviewers, though its cinematics can be incredibly long for better or worse. Grandia II is arguably the best RPG ever released for the Dreamcast, so it shouldn't exactly come as a surprise that the game's PS2 port manages to secure a pretty lofty position on this particular list as well. From its real-time battle system with almost RTS-like movement restrictions to its war-torn world populated with memorable characters and plots, Grandia II checks so many of the JRPG's genre best boxes while offering a personality that is very much its own. Known in Japan as Shadow Hearts 2, this Japanese RPG sequel to Shadow Hearts came out in 2004. It takes place 6 months after the original title and continues its trend of alternate history and Lovecraftian horror. Fans fell in love with the dark themes, comedic moments, mystical themes, and serious narrative when this game came out in 2004. A cult classic that arguably deserves to be more than just that, Shadow Hearts Covenant is still a unique experience almost 2 decades later. The Judgment Ring combat system can produce some incredibly satisfying combos, while the story is not only refreshingly mature but also packed to the brim with unforgettable characters. If Dark Cloud 2 was just its more traditional RPG elements, I feel comfortable saying that it would likely still find a spot somewhere on this list. It's hard not to admire this game's ARPG combat, narrative, and characters for both their unique charms and the way they imagine certain concepts that are far more common today. However, it's Dark Cloud 2's time-traveling and world-building systems that really set it apart. Building a better world and being able to look ahead in order to see the benefits of your designs is one of those incredible concepts that would certainly be replicated if it wasn't so complex. Now set for a modern remake, Persona 3 was the beginning of the franchise's break into the mainstream. It also began a transition away from some of the themes of its 3 predecessors, with the art, music, and gameplay having a more youthful pop. The biggest example of this was the social link system, which added dating simulator elements. The game was full of content, with every aspect making it feel alive in a way that wasn't always felt in RPGs of that era. The SEAS team also became incredibly popular, especially compared to the protagonists of the game's predecessors. This led to several add-ons and ports of the now classic Atlas title. Coming out long after the PS3's debut, Persona 4 was the PS2's swan song, and the console could not have gone out on a better note. Even if the eventual release of the superior P4 Golden rendered the vanilla version obsolete, that does not take anything away from the PS2 original since it is still brilliant. As with all modern Persona games, the campaign is split into dungeon crawling and social sim sections, with the latter hogging most of the playthrough. Thankfully, the non-combat sections are arguably the best part of each game since Atlas regularly delivers gripping stories that are not afraid to get dark if required. Persona 4 is not only the best turn-based JRPG on the PS2 but also the console's best monster collecting gaming. While exploring the TV world, players will encounter personas, who they can negotiate with to add them to their team. They can even fuse personas together to create a more powerful monster. I remember that in the weeks and months leading up to Final Fantasy X's release, there was this growing sense that this was going to be the PS2's first true system seller as well as a significant new Final Fantasy game that could very well rival Final Fantasy VII in terms of its impact. Remarkably, I think Final Fantasy X managed to live up to a great deal of that hype. Final Fantasy X benefits from everything that this franchise accomplished up until this point while expertly solving what many considered to be some of the series' gameplay shortcomings. In many ways, it remains the Final Fantasy game that is easiest to recommend to those curious to see why this is the one RPG series that has defined so many different generations and so many shifts in the genre. Rogue Galaxy was developed by Level 5, the makers of popular titles like Inai no Kuni, Yokai Watch, Dark Cloud, and Professor Layton. The sci-fi RPG came out in North America in 2007 for the PS2 and became available for the PS4 through the PlayStation Network in 2015. Nowadays, Level 5's game is accessible through PS Plus Premium. Rogue Galaxy is praised for its setting, combat, characters, and its array of fun extracurricular activities and side quests. As far as PS2 JRPGs with real-time combat are considered, this title is among the platform's best, and it is somewhat underrated as it came out late into the console's lifespan. Earlier in this article, I mentioned that the PS2 featured some incredible ARPGs that don't always get the love that they deserved. Well, Dark Alliance has to be considered the star of that particular category. Even if you convinced yourself to look at Dark Alliance as little more than a Diablo knockoff, it would still easily rank high among the best entries in that somewhat dubious subgenre. Yet, someone needs to speak out for the way this game made that formula not only accessible to console players but reimagined it in such a way that makes this one of the most purely entertaining co-op RPG experiences ever committed to any platform. Champions of Norrath is a very traditional RPG in which players can choose their appearance, race, and skills before beginning the gameplay and story. The game is split into 5 acts, with hack and slash gameplay. The game got a sequel called Champions, returned to ARMS a year after its release. The sequel was not as well received as its predecessor, although both titles are enjoyable action RPG romps. 2 decades after its debut, Champions of Norrath might struggle to impress newcomers, but that does not diminish its original value. Final Fantasy XII was released to strong reviews, but it's always been something of a divisive entry into this famed franchise. Some criticized the ways it significantly altered the Final Fantasy formula, which was only recently reinvented in Final Fantasy X, while others criticized smaller aspects of the game like its music, writing, and characters. To be honest, it feels like that discourse is still there to this day. As time goes on, though, my respect for Final Fantasy XII has only grown, from its bold gambit system that feels far more accessible and common now than it did when this game launched to the way it makes its overworld feel far more significant than it does in many other FF games. This game just excels at embodying the spirit of this franchise without ever feeling like it's entirely relying on the series' laurels. So, did you like the games I recommended? So leave your like, subscribe to the channel to follow me and activate the bell because I post a lot of videos on this channel and you can't miss it. I would like to remind you that in the description we have a list of different products that can make your gaming experience much better. If you want to buy, the link will be in the description. Anyway, thank you very much for following me this far and until next time, bye.